Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh, now I know why priests do that. That's kind of fun. Welcome to today's staged reading of Dear Neighbor, a play written by our beloved Sister Jane Morrissey. My name is Elizabeth Gord, and I am a 2023 graduate of Elms College. At the beginning of this year, Sister Jane and her good friend and editor, Pam, approached me about Dear Neighbor. We met in their office, Rusty's up the street, and Sister Jane sold me on the play. Though I believe in the backstory of the play, I think Sister Jane could quite honestly sell me on a $1,000 jar of peanut butter if I owned a peanut butter factory. What started out as a one-person monologue on the life of Mother St. John Fonbon has blossomed into a more extensive history of the Sisters of St. Joseph from their beginnings in France in 1650 to now. We are grateful to Sister Jane Morrissey for inviting us all into the lives of 5 remarkable Sisters of St. Joseph. Thank you, Sister Jane, for gracing us with your wisdom, wit, and extraordinary storytelling. We are blessed to be sharing this time with you. Before we begin today's performance, we would like to introduce you to Dr. Harry Dumais, who will offer a welcome on behalf of the college. Dr. Harry Dumais is president of the College of Our Lady of the Elms. Prior to joining Elms College, Dr. Dumais was Senior Vice President for Finance and Chief Financial Officer at St. Anselm College, Chief Financial Officer, Associate Dean for Finance and Information Technology at the Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Harvard University, and has also held leadership positions in finance and administration at Boston College and Boston University. Dr. Dumais received a Bachelor's of Science degree, magna cum laude, in Mechanical Technology from Lincoln University, Missouri, a Master's in Public Administration from Framingham State University, an MBA and Graduate Certificate in Corporate Finance from Boston University, and a PhD in Higher Education Administration from Boston College. Please welcome Dr. Harry Dumais to the podium.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for this wonderful introduction. I don't need this step. I see that you also have been under the spell of Sister Jane Morrissey. So welcome to the club. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. Now, I know that you are all here for the play and not to hear me speak. So I'm going to be very, very, very brief. But it is my honor to welcome everyone to this performance of Dear Neighbor, a work composed by our dear friend, Sister Jane Morrissey. I'm delighted to see so many friends of Elms College, members of the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, our President Emerita, Sister Kathleen Keating, was here, members of the Elms College Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, members of the extended Elms College community, alumni in the audience. Thank you. Sister Jane has a way of getting people together, and here we are this evening. And it's not just quite a year since we were here celebrating Sister Jane for the release of her autobiography, Jane in the Box. And I'll put a shameless plug. There are books in the back of the room here, so please avail yourselves of a copy as you walk outside of the of Veritas Auditorium. As I said then and I say now, for more than 60 years, Sister Jane has demonstrated the best of her Catholic faith through her actions and through her words, and in so doing has touched the hearts of so many, including members of my own family. Dear Neighbor, as you may know, relates the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph from the congregation's formation in Le Puy, France in 1650 to its expansion into Springfield in the 1880s through the 20th century and into the modern day. The story is told by 5 pivotal women who witnessed it. Sister Jeannie Berdier, or as the French would say, Jeanne Bourdier, one of the original 6 sisters. Mother St. John Fontbonne, the order's leader during and after the French Revolution, who also oversaw expansion to America in the 1830s. Sister Mary Cecilia Bowen, who led the formation of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Springfield in 1883. Sister Mary Dooley, my late predecessor, who led the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield during the pivotal 1970s. Excuse me. And lastly, Sister Patricia McDonald, a member of the present-day leadership team. 5 different stories, 5 different eras, one common thread. Lives spent devoted to the Sisters of St. Joseph's philosophy of uniting neighbor to neighbor and neighbor to God without distinction. I am aware from my years of knowing Sister Jane that she is far too modest to ever entertain this. But if the need were ever to arise to lengthen the Dear Neighbor script, perhaps by adding the narrative of a 6th sister of great influence, Sister Jane, in my opinion, would be a worthy choice, and I think many would agree with me. In her more than 60 years as a Sister of St. Joseph, her list of accomplishments and achievements as a scholar, teacher, activist, and servant is too long to fully mention. Locally, she founded Holyoke's Homework House to tutor young students and Springfield's Gray House to aid low-income families. She has spent years overseas giving aid and comfort inside refugee camps and to communities suffering from crippling poverty. And through her actions and her words, she has been a tireless advocate for the Sisters of St. Joseph's message of equality, social justice, and peace. I do hope that you enjoyed this performance, which is quite timely, on the eve of the Feast of St. Joseph. As I conclude, I would like to offer my thanks to our Office of Campus Ministry, especially Director Eileen Kirk, who coordinated today's event, all the members of the cast and production, especially Elizabeth Gourd for her direction on stage, and of course, Sister Jane Morrissey for her work in bringing to life the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph and some of the legendary characters who were central figures in that history. So thank you all once again for being here, and welcome once again.
I also don't need the step, but I had already committed to it, so. Thank you again, Dr. Dumais, so much for your kind wishes and continued support for Sister Jane's creative projects. We now ask that you silent your cell phones and quiet your minds as we present you with the Journey Through Time.
Oops. Conceived of God's embrace of Le Puy-en-Velay, the Sisters of St. Joseph have spent nearly 375 years turning the world upside down by love. Founded in the hope that one day we would be known as the congregation of the great love of God, our sisters have known that from the start. As the blessed disciple wrote, there is no way You can love the God you do not see, but by loving the dear neighbor whom you do see, especially the poor. Our names are countless. We are French, Irish, Indian, African, Latin. Our stories are often hidden. Well, I cannot tell you everything, so today I will introduce you to 5 sisters: Jean Berdier, Jean Fonblanc, Ellen Bowen, Mary Dooley, and Patricia MacDonald, who will tell something of their own stories, a sampling of 4 centuries of our history. We were founded in the 17th century, a terrible century in France. Approximately 90% of its citizens lived in small towns or villages, or were dispersed throughout the rural countryside, like Le Puy. Because increasingly lands are held by the wealthy elite, the rest of the population, for whom agriculture was its mainstay, became more and more vulnerable to natural disease, deprivation, and disasters. Europe had entered a little ice age when average temperatures fell, the growing season shortened, harvests were reduced, and that caused famines. Malnutrition, starvation brought heavy mortality and a deeper, more widespread poverty. France had 4 deadly famines between 1630 and 1694, and several others almost as severe. The people endured almost continuous warfare, international wars, civil wars, and a number of peasant and low-class uprisings. These brought widespread devastation and destitution and inflicted the dreaded passage and billeting of soldiers on peasants and townspeople. Periodic outbreaks of plague increased. Well, as in any age or place where misery prevails, children were the most vulnerable. In Couche, an orphanage in Paris, some were sold for 8 souls apiece to beggars who broke their arms and legs so that people would be inclined to give them more alms. And then they let them die of starvation. Is it any wonder that at that very time God would issue in the hearts of women a call? That call defied centuries of civil and canonical strictures and broke through the cloistered walls of religious life. It enabled women to create a design as old as the Gospels, as new as the dreams of some 70 founders of religious congregations established in France between 1650 and 1720. Who but women would respond to such widespread devastation and turn the world upside down by love?
It is the 17th century. The year is 1694. Just call me Jean. Jean Berdet. I was baptized, and little did I dream in the days when I could not write my name, that on a wintry day in 1650, when I put a cross beneath what they told me was my name, I was doing something that would change my life completely. Little did I dream that these 44 years later, I would have long administered this Hotel Dieu in Vienne, not far from the village in which I was baptized. Little did I dream that I would have seen this book through publication, that I would tell you my story. Yet, what I tell is true. We were 6 dreamers on fire with a dream. Claudia, the 3 Annas, Francois, and I. Fee, they called us. We were daughters, daughters of a dream. It was the dream of Father Jean-Pierre Médaille, our inspiration, but our dream too. Others thought him wild. His Jesuit brothers thought him wild. His superior thought him peculiar and wrong. Working with women, he was wild, but with his own indomitable instinct that we women had wildfire inside us. He was right. We are wild enough to turn disaster, disease, and death itself upside down with love. When we six signed a contract that day, December 13th, 1650, we changed history. 5 of us marked crosses under what they told us was our name. Claudia Chastel alone could write her own name. Together, we said yes. We meant it. We could give our lives. The contract expressed the covenant that wed our hearts to God, whom we cannot see in these hurt and hungry and helpless people who we still see daily. We are sisters of St. Joseph. The fire was in us, and it flung out over mountain and valley like ribbons and lace from spools in the hands of Parisian dressmakers. The mere mention of ribbons makes me remember the day, 4 years later, when the 6 delegates of the La Puy City Assembly descended on us. They came in all their frumpy finery and all their fuss and fury that we women had dared to establish a new foundation in their city without their approval. They had come to expel us from La Puy. When they arrived at the hospital, Francois Arad and Marguerite de Saint-Laurent welcomed them lovingly with that gospel love, wise as serpents and guileless as doves. Hospitably, the sisters invited them in, disarming them totally. They thought to entertain them in the ribbon room. We were there, as usual, making ribbon, teaching the poor girls and orphans to do it too. Ribbon translated into a language these officials valued. Lace and ribbon making had long been the industries that attracted to La Puy and filled their coffers. Smiling, those 6 men left, liberated from their worries that we and our girls would tax the city's treasury. Smiling, we stayed liberated from civic authority. The fire of God in us flung out farther and gently, like the ribbon and lace we made together. It lassoed girls and women in these hills and valleys and lured them into our love story. Wherever we went in the provinces of Forêt and Valais, we did much for little, sometimes for nothing, and so the bishops blessed us. We began with orphans, then opened a free school for poor children, then a boarding school for girls from a higher class in order to earn funds to serve those with empty pockets. We helped families who could not support their children, visited the sick and dying, administered and staffed hospitals, dispensaries of medications for the sick, homes for what they called fallen women, a school for converted Protestants. We were responsible for providing relief in the poor parishes, teaching in schools for the poor, and setting up and running workshops for making lace and ribbon. Our works were as motley as we are. The La Puy City Council came to appreciate us. I memorized the words of their official declaration that we, Sisters of St. Joseph, were one of the most useful establishments for the city. They said that we assisted those under our wing, and I quote, with the care and regard which is rarely seen elsewhere. I first heard about the declaration after coming in 1668 to Vienne, near St. Julien, where I was born. Sent here with 2 companions, I was to take charge of the Hotel Dieu. For more than a quarter century, I have. I hadn't been here long when passing through Gap, a neighboring village here in the French Alps, I stopped at its hospital. Seeing conditions there, I got sick. Back at home, the sights and smells at the hospital robbed me of my sleep. Never one to be deprived of my dreams, I offered to send 3 sisters. How quickly the bishop and town officials said yes. But in no uncertain terms, I told them that our sisters would not come unless they made some changes. That hospital had everything all mixed up, men with women, sick with healthy. That could not continue. They decreed necessary changes, and our sisters went. Just about 4 years ago, nightmares I had after first visiting Gap returned with a vengeance. I received word that on the return march from Italy, the army of Louis XIV was forced by an epidemic to stagger into our hospital. Every single one of our sisters caring for them died. I know to this day that they died from the same excessive love that sapped Jesus' life on the cross. I can still hear Jean-Pierre Madai teaching us the counsel of St. Paul to have that mind in us, which was in Christ Jesus, who did not deem equality with God something to be clung to, but emptied himself and became of human estate. What could I do but send sisters to replace those who had that in mind, even to their death by caring? It's a risky business turning the world upside down with love. GAP is only one of the 10 foundations we have established from Van. Wherever we go, we sisters love one another. We share everything, our widows, garb, our money, spiritual books. Speaking of books, I am reminded that I want to tell you about this one, our Constitution. I already told you how strange it is that I, who could not sign my name those 44 years ago, would get involved in publishing. I could see errors creeping into copies of our Constitution and feared we were losing something of our original spirit. Where would we ever find time to make copies of our little rules for our new house? We are not scribes. So I called together a group of sisters to compare different versions of this book, in which we preserved the teaching of our first days, more than 4 decades ago. They formulated an acceptable text, and I asked the Archbishop to have the official Constitution printed. He agreed. Can you imagine how I feel each time I hold in my 2 hands the first printed copy of the dream, the Constitution of Sisters of St. Joseph? Then I know that my world too has been turned upside down by love.
Sœurs de Saint Joseph, Missouri. My nieces wrote for my 80th birthday. That's a long time to have lived. It is now the year 1839. Weeks ago, I finished my term as Reverend Mother of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Lyon. I keep remembering a story my grandfather used to tell me in his carpentry shop. Long ago, he said, a carpenter built a table for his family, and they used to gather around it to break bread and tell stories. One day, evil men broke down the table and used the wood to build a gallows on which those declared guilty died. Then a good man rose up. He tore down the gallows and used the wood to build a ship that carried the unwanted and those who loved them to a new world. I was baptized, Jean Fontaine, the very day I was born, March 31st, 1759. As children, my older sister Marie and I came to know the Sisters of St. Joseph. They were our aunts. They were our teachers. They taught us to read and write. When we were older and boarding at the Sisters' Academy in Le Puy, they taught us to make ribbon and lace. All their lessons have come in handy. Marie and I learned to be Sisters of St. Joseph in Monestral with our aunt, Sister St. Francis, as superior. There, I made my vows. There, at age 26, I succeeded her. She had taught me how to teach. Now, I was to learn if she had taught me how to serve the community well. In those years, revolution was simmering. I could see it in the eyes of the poor families of our students and in those who wandered our streets begging. I had been superior 4 years when mobs stormed the walls of the Bastille. Paris lay many leagues away, but we felt the rumblings of this revolution like the aftershocks in Pompeii. Our church was secularized, our land was confiscated, our priests, according to the civil constitution of the clergy, were to be paid by the state. Bought off, like so many others, our parish priest, Father Ollier, willingly signed the oath of allegiance to the civil constitution. What did it matter to him that the Pope forbade it? Into our convents, we received priests who refused to sign the oath, and so were banned from parish churches. They fed us with the Eucharist, and we, stripped down like the Eucharist, as Jean-Pierre Médaille said we would be, learned to be content if we had much, or little, or nothing at all. Civil authorities in the state and this new civil church were bewildered as to what they could do with, or better said, without us, active sisters. Without qualms, they had closed monasteries and confiscated their lands. But what would be done in hospitals and schools without us? On the other hand, how could they not suppress us? They engaged in debate. In one case, I've heard they spoke of us Sisters of St. Joseph as charlatans, who just because we could read and write were doing the work of lawyers and pharmacists and doctors, even surgeons. They determined to treat us like vermin, whose infested homes had become the haunt and foul refuge of all the refractory priests. By 1793, the revolution may have been over, but the reign of terror escalated. Rather than separate ourselves from our faith by taking the oath of liberty, equality, most of us chose prison. Since our property now belonged to the state, some of us were jailed in what had been our beloved convents. I was incarcerated for 9 months. One Sunday, my captors ordered me to work. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that if I chose to live by the laws of the Republic, I would be somewhere else entirely. In jail, I mourned our dear sisters who went to the guillotine in Le Puy. Marie-Anne Garnier and Jean-Marie Aubert. Some days I had the courage to pray to follow them. Though rumor had our company long worrying how far above our necks the murderous blade was suspended, I must have been unworthy. The news reached our cells. Robespierre was dead, and we were free. But where were we free to go? Our convents and lands had been confiscated. Some sisters went to their families. I did. Some went to their convents and found them destroyed or occupied. Others found their schools in the hands of strangers. Fewer found their hospitals run by the state. Although a minority, some sisters in hospitals had never budged an inch. To the hospital at Gap, established by one of our first sisters, Jeanne Berdier, Napoleon brought Austrian soldiers, prisoners of war, suffering with typhus. We cared for them. In 1801, Napoleon's Concordat made peace with the church, but left power and land in the hands of the state. Religious communities were allowed to exist as long as they were useful and compliant. Oh, what mattered the description, so long as we were free to serve our dear neighbor, especially the poor? I stayed in Bas with Marie and our parents until the day Napoleon's uncle, Cardinal Fesch, arrived at our door to charge me with returning and rebuilding and reorganizing the religious life we had known. We women began to do again what we had done before: divide the city into sections and care for those who had no one to care for them. We remembered Father Medai's advice that, like the Eucharist, we be totally for others. We rebuilt and restored and rose up like bread. We would do all we could to turn the world turned upside down by revolution, right side up by loving. I could tell you many stories about those years, about our sisters and families and friends, but this letter reminds me to tell you about Félicité de Duras, the Countess of Roche-Jacqueline. 3 years ago, she paid the passage of the sisters who have written from Missouri. She had read in the annals of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith in Lyon an appeal for missionaries and financial aid from Bishop Joseph Rosati of St. Louis. She had already financed several of our foundations in France and was intrigued by the prospect of doing something new in what we called the New World. She extracted a promise of sisters from me, then wrote to the bishop. She told him that she knew one of the foundations, which began in a stable and with only 6 cents. She assured him this establishment prospered, as well as others begun in like manner. She informed him about our new work in prisons, as well as our traditional works with the sick and the poor and the imprisoned and the orphans and the deaf and the students. She also let him know that we make ribbons. Last time I counted, since the revolution, we have 200 new foundations. I took the count after seeing off my nieces, Delphine and Fébroni, and brought 4 others on the stagecoach that brought them to the steamboat, that brought them across the Atlantic to Louisiana and to the Mississippi, then brought them finally to Vide Poche, Empty Pocket, right outside St. Louis. How could I know when my sister Marie and I whispered in our little bed, or when I was imprisoned, or when Cardinal Fesch knocked, that at 80 years of age, I would have seen Sisters of St. Joseph if ground and crushed like the wheat and grapes of the Eucharist, giving so much and going so far to turn the world upside down by love.
Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, for which we are about to receive. It is late It is late 1890, August. Lord, to tell you the truth, I'm not feeling well this morning. I don't mean to seem ungrateful, but even after making 2 retreats this summer, my spirit is low. I still want to turn the world upside down by loving, but it feels more like my insides are turning upside down. I ask you truly, am I turning the wrong way? Since taking my turn, dividing the cities, and serving the poor, I've tried so hard to follow your directions. The path has wound like a brown ribbon of roads and railroad tracks from Elizabethtown, New Jersey, where I was born on Our Lady's birthday and baptized, Ellen Bowen, to Springfield, Massachusetts, where today they call me Mother Mary Cecilia. You've been faithful in flagging me on and making me mindful of the one warning sign erected in my mind from childhood. Don't take no for an answer. I don't, not even from you sometimes. If I do, how will we ever manage to turn this stubborn, biased world upside down by love? I consider sometimes my friends who came to Flushing, New York, that day in 1860, when I and the others made vows. Those friends were both Catholic and Protestant. Friendship recognizes no denomination. Your people are your people, however and wherever we pray. In 1880, 7 years after I missed a train to Boston and our first Massachusetts mission, I got sent to Springfield. There, I met up with a bishop who worried about stepping on Protestants' political toes. I already knew we gained nothing by hanging our heads and backing away. I started to divide the cities of the Pioneer Valley in 1880 on walks with the school children from St. Patrick's in Chicopee Falls to Holyoke. We'd walk and walk until we'd see a poor shanty, and we'd stop by to see if anyone was sick or hungry. Your dear children knew they could reach into my pocket and pull out oranges like these, and hard-boiled eggs, and sometimes candy. No matter when we came back home, we'd find my pockets empty. 3 years later, Bishop O'Reilly requested of dear Mother Teresa Mullen back in Long Island that we become the Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield. And we did. The Springfield paper reported the arrival of 12. We thought of ourselves as your pioneer apostles. The newspaper said that education would be our primary work, and we would visit the sick and the friendless, do parish work, teach Sunday school, give lessons in music and needlework. You alone knew what was really in store for us. When you chose me as Mother Mary Cecilia, I'll bet you knew from the beginning that I was as forthright as Bishop O'Reilly was fearful. He was inclined to accept the restrictions imposed by civil authority on Catholic presence at the poorhouse and the jail and the municipal hospital. Not I. I am a sister of St. Joseph. I first brought the novices to the almshouse, and when turned away, I turned around and I asked all the influential people I knew, and all the influential people the bishop knew, and all the cloistered religious we both knew, to pray and do whatever their principles allowed. And remember, it was the day after St. Joseph's Day, when the first boy to graduate from Cathedral High School, William Wariski, served the first Mass, the Bishop's Mass, at the poorhouse. How many oranges and how much candy and how much love and how much hope we left behind us that day. Bishop O'Reilly, remember, was equally certain that Catholics would never get into the jail, so I took a trip to Westfield to the home of that dear Protestant gentleman, Hampden County Commissioner Root. Just to make sure we'd get to the root of the situation, we stopped at St. Mary's Church en route. You, of course, had been there long before I arrived. When I saw how little the statues of Mary and Joseph were in that new big church, I promised you bigger statues if the commissioner proved big enough to agree to my plan. I don't need to tell you that story's happy ending. You know, too, how often the sisters and I go to jail now, and how that poor, bored young man, awaiting trial, bore his way into my heart. He inspired a new plan of contacting anew all those influential people to request just 2 books, each to build a library for people serving time. 300 books they have now, and I have a thank you note in the beautiful script of one Frederick Conroy, who assured me that he was thanking me on behalf of both denominations. When I heard the story of one Father James McDermott, who had to threaten force before they would allow him to administer extreme unction to someone dying at the municipal hospital, I was prepared for the doorkeeper. He turned me away, only to watch me walk right by and hear me insist that visiting the sick is one of the special works that God has assigned us. As I urged my companion to come right along, on the way out, that dour doorkeeper seemed to expect me to say that we'd be back at least once a week. He seems to like to see us now, and every once in a while, I give him an orange too. Just 7 years ago, we were 12, and now we are 68, with countless friends and benefactors, and 17 schools in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Our life may be simple. I remember eating ginger soup for supper, but it's also full of sweet surprises, like the nights that the first graders slept in our attic as the snow fell and fell and fell. On the 3rd day, when my mittened hand put the yardstick through the mounds to the ground, the snow was deeper than the yardstick was tall. But what was I saying this summer morning? Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which you are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. And Lord, though my stomach is turning upside down, and I don't feel up to eating this orange, I ask you only for the grace to continue with your help, dividing the city and doing my part to turn this world upside down with love.
They call me Mary, Mary. It's a grand old name. My name is Sister Mary Dooley. It is Mount Marie, and it is 19 1979. I was right. Mingling Mary, my sisters call me. They tease me, but the mingling comes from deep within. For the longer I live, the truer I know it to be. Our God is mingling in everything. I've been remembering a trip to Le Puy, the birthplace of the community that taught me in high school and college and became my very own family. And I've been thanking God for women who oriented me toward excellence, tempered by gentleness, peace, and joy. I was thinking today of my dear high school teacher, Sister Elizabeth Michael, who had first turned my world upside down with love and made me think she was what I wanted to be. I thought also of Sister Mary Antonella, who in my college days, whatever the campus laws, encouraged me to speak to the editor of the Springfield Daily News about better coverage for the College of Our Lady of the Elms. And when the editor took me out to dinner, and I walked through the college gates long after the prescribed hour, she didn't censure me like Cinderella's stepmother or campus me, but instead congratulated me. These sisters of St. Joseph seem to know that we'd never turn the world upside down by loving if we didn't mingle in it. While studying at the Sorbonne, I became aware of Karl Barth's counsel to Christians that we walk through this world with the Holy Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Paris, at the time of the Second Vatican Council, taught me that the more I mingled these two, the closer I came to the truth of the matter. Karl Barth's counsel wasn't all that different from the plain wisdom of dear Irish-born Sister Alberta. I can still see her in my first mission in North Adams, the night she was pulling the curtain aside to look out the window. When Sister Gualberta came by, she yanked that curtain back into place and turned Sister Alberta toward the parlor door, insisting that she didn't need to know what was going on in this world. Oh, but Sister Alberta looked her straight in the eye and inquired, "Didn't you know, sister? We're in America, and it's a free country." Truly, rhetorical questions, I learned that night, persuade without alienation. That was a good lesson to keep in mind when my sister Eleanor and I returned from the Sorbonne with a bit of Europe in our luggage and in our minds and in our hearts. It was an amazing time when, imagine, here we were in this diocese with a bishop who was not keen on change. Our studies at the Sorbonne cost $25 a year, and we returned with more than anyone could pay for. Inspired by the wind and fire of the new Pentecost, we were not about to shut the church windows opened by good Pope John the 23rd. When Mother Mary Borgia, who had reluctantly given us permission to wear secular clothes in the face of hostility toward religious in France, convened the extraordinary chapter after Vatican II here at Mount Marie, we could not imagine how the extraordinary would descend upon us on the wings of that daring dove we call the Holy Spirit. I did not think that Eleanor would become a counselor and I would become Reverend Mother, and then president of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious in these United States. Who would have dared to dream then that I would receive invitations from President Jimmy Carter to visit the Vatican on Air Force One twice with people like Vice President Walter Mondale and the writer Sister Joan Chittister. I would mingle with the crowds at the installations of Pope John Paul I and John Paul II. All of our sisters were learning already a new vocabulary in small groups and large groups, in inter-American conferences. Subsidiarity, solidarity, preferential option for the poor, consensus. These words telling us that justice is a constitutive element of the preaching of the Gospels began to jump out of our mouths into the lives of our communities. Through that extraordinary chapter, we returned to our roots and remembered and were reminded of stories heard from the oldest, wisest women we called sister. They were stories about Le Puy and Lyon, Springfield and Holyoke, and about sisters in soup lines and hand-in-hand in line, bringing food from convent kitchens to hungry dear neighbors, and Sacred Heart badges and compassion to the poor alcoholics on the street. Our old stories mingled with gospel stories and the signs of our times. Sisters became midwives, birthing new stories of justice and peace in our schools and at the Elms, in parishes and houses of prayer and hospital chaplaincies, in diocesan offices and prisons, in home care and health care and care for the unborn and unwanted. We began to protest on behalf of the farm workers and the Vietnamese and women and children. Our mission opened to Africa and spread, even at the time the size of our community was shrinking. Some sisters left, but continued to work at our sides, mingling our charism into their newfound lives as wives and mothers and grandmothers, professional women. Our newly liberated sense of ourselves gave us a public voice on behalf of others as well as ourselves in both the world and the church. Shortly after the Fall River province of the Le Puy Sisters of St. Joseph merged with us, we began to recall and realize how painfully unjust was the church system that gave us pennies for our stipend and our sustenance. It wasn't that long ago when I put on my very pretty pink dress with a pretty lace collar that made me remember Le Puy. And I addressed our entire congregation in the multi-purpose room here at the Mount. I told them the unpretty truth that once again the Bishop of Springfield had denied us a raise, and that with increasing responsibility for our oldest sister's health care, we had to take seriously the consequences of more than 300 sisters working in our home diocese for an unjust wage. Would my sisters stand with me, I asked, if I stood up to the bishop to say his answer was unacceptable? And we were wondering if we needed to find work elsewhere. One by one, our sisters stood, and everyone in that room was standing for one purpose. I can still see the oldest in all her fragility, edging out of her wheelchair, and one sister to either side of her, holding her up for dear life. I could feel the Holy Spirit winding around us like ribbon, blowing through us like ribbons of electricity that day. After the meeting, I went to Mass, where the gospel story about the mother whom Jesus refused when she asked for help for her daughter mingled with her family predicament. Jesus said he was sent for the children of his house, his house. She countered, "Don't even the dogs get the scraps that fall from the master's table?" After Mass, I immediately phoned the bishop to again raise the question of an increase in our salaries. This time, like that Syro-Phoenician mother, I got yes for an answer. The news galloped through the community, and I felt in my bones Jesus saying to me what he said to that mother: "You can go home happy." It's overwhelming sometimes, but I have learned how much happens between our roots and the signs of our times, between the newspaper, yes, and the gospel. We know now what the Vatican II document on the church in the modern world opened with these words: the joys and hopes, the grief and anguish of the people of our time, especially of those who are poor or afflicted in any way, are the joys and hopes, the grief and anguish of the followers of Christ as well. Now, I tell you, that's how the world and the church turns somersaults, and it becomes all upside down with love. Extraordinary.
It is 2024. I am Sister Patricia McDonald, Patty, the Vice President of the congregation, one member of a 4-sister leadership team elected in 2022. This is the constitution of our community. It has been rewritten for these times and was approved in 1886 during the presidency of Sister Kathleen Keating. I entered the Sisters of St. Joseph in 1967, expecting to teach, and I did, in North Adams, in Northampton, and in Holyoke, where I served as principal. But I am one example of the ways in which our ministries become more personal and more diverse, as some sisters left teaching and became pastoral ministers, home health workers, and so forth. Some of these job changes were precipitated by schools closing. In other cases, sisters simply felt called for different positions. For instance, I chose to work in our Peace and Justice Center, and then in several capacities with various populations, often under the auspices of Open Pantry Community Services. During this period, Sister Kathleen challenged us to make the stranger a neighbor, and while continuing our full-time ministries, we sought to do so. For example, sisters began to volunteer in soup kitchens and with battered women. We joined the farm workers' struggle for better wages and working conditions by boycotting grapes and joining picket lines. Such direct contact with the stranger changed our view of mission and ministry. I studied for a master's in social work and returned to Open Pantry, which was then providing walk-in services to individuals experiencing homelessness, mental health issues, and addiction. As program director, I enjoyed working with staff to respond to any need that came our way. My world grew as my reflection and action enveloped people of all ages, classes, races, the rich, the poor, and everyone in between. Then, I was elected to the Sisters of St. Joseph leadership team, and served for 6 years. In 1999, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Vermont asked if their congregation might rejoin ours. In 2001, this became a reality. The Sisters of St. Joseph in the Fall River Diocese, with links to Le Puy, had asked to merge with us in 1971. That merger in 1974 made history as the first between women's communities to serve Vatican approval. Our sisters Estelle Santropia and Mary Dooley paved the way. The roads and regions we're then traveling ran east toward Fall River, north toward Rutland, Vermont, and as far away as Africa and Jamaica. By now, this merging had become emblematic of life of the religious women across the world. Were we not sisters, after all? After the first term in leadership, I worked for Community and Support Options as case manager with individuals experiencing mental illness. I was assigned my first job and pursued others and loved everyone I had. While our community was growing in new ways and exploring possibilities, our aging and infirm population was increasing, and the time came to consider selling Montmarie, our largest property. After lengthy inclusive discernment and dialogue, we eventually did sell. The site is now home to privately owned healthcare facility, as well as low-income apartments where more than 30 of us live, mostly in retirement, and in a community that is continuously recreating itself. Much has changed, but wherever you may find us, our mission, that all may be one, and that we make the stranger a neighbor, has been constant since our founding in 1650. One aspect of responding to the needs of the dear neighbor was our chapter's institution in 2005 in the community of St. Joseph, which includes our associates, agrégés, and partners in mission. In studying our history, we discovered that our first members included women who were vowed and women who were not, so this inclusive structure made sense. In 1976, associates became the first group to share our charism, our inclination towards reconciliation, and our mission. Later, from among the associates came individuals who wanted to express their connection with the community in a whole deeper way. They were called agrégés, as lay members had been in Le Puy. We also began to see with new eyes our lay employees as partners in mission. How many now do work once done perpetually vowed sisters and do so at our table and in our spirit? Countless of those who serve on our behalf. We Sisters of St. Joseph came here and crossed the continent from the 19th into the 20th centuries to respond to the needs of the times. We reached out to other immigrants from Europe, and in our congregation, small in the beginning, grew rapidly. It was a period in the United States where the need was great and private church schools were prized. In that time, the need lessened. Others have developed, and we continue to respond. Our sisters in full-time ministry now are few. Still, we find ways to reach out to the dear neighbor, ways that are indirect and sometimes invisible, with prayer, presence, financial support of fundraising activities for the common good, letters to politicians in support of or opposition to legislation concerning current issues. Some schools we founded remain, largely staffed by lay teachers and administrators, and carry on in the tradition of our first sisters. I entered the community with 24 women, the last large group to enter. After us, for a decade or so, entrants came in groups of 6 or fewer, and that number gradually dwindled to 1 or 2 at a time. Were we the last group trained in the old order? As postulants, we received the habit, while the rest of the community was changing into skirts and blouses, wearing short veils and letting their hair grow. We entered on the cusp of change, so it was easier for us to adapt to changes. Also, seeing the number of vowed sisters shrink has been easier, perhaps because for at least the past 20 years, we have wrestled openly with realistic projections. Still, living the reality is difficult. Who among us wants to own the fragility that comes with aging? We are not alone in facing these challenges of the times. We are but one congregation in the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph that extends from Maine to Hawaii and beyond, and whose members serve across the face of the earth. We belong also to our country's Leadership Conference of Women Religious and to the International Union of Women's Congregations in Rome. You may recall that several years ago, along with the majority of women religious worldwide, we embraced Vatican's second call to return to our roots and to integrate justice issues with spirituality. When a more conservative pope was elected, however, some Vatican officials saw an opportunity to question women's religious on how we were living our vowed commitment. A very specific questionnaire was sent to every congregation, asked us about day-to-day activities from a very rule-oriented perspective. As members of the LCWR, we joined with most other congregations in considering whether these black and white questions spoke to the lived reality of religious life today. To answer them was impossible for women who embraced a model of unity in diversity rather than unity in uniformity. After discussion and much prayer, my community chose to join others in respectfully offering the Constitution as a means of evaluating our vowed commitment, rather than answering questions posed by the Vatican. National and local news outlets sensationalized the entire process by presenting it as Vatican's official attempts to reprimand women's religious. People from across the United States wrote letters to the editor in support of sisters. We felt a groundswell of support. Eventually, the controversy subsided, and we continued to live our lives with fidelity to the gospel and the Constitution. Meanwhile, the role of all women in society and in the church, somewhat, has evolved to a point where they can and do minister to their dear neighbor without any formal connection to a religious congregation. I am at peace with the changes. We have never existed just to keep our Constitution growing. I believe our founders and our early leaders would agree. They focused on meeting the unmet needs of the dear neighbor. As needs have changed and will change, we will continue to respond. As I said earlier, I was elected to the leadership for the second time in 2022. I don't know if I aspired to it, but I felt called to it because others affirmed my ability to do it again. The focus of leadership has shifted over the years. Now, we spend much of our time with our elderly and frail sisters as they make changes for their lives and draw closer to eternal life. I hope and believe that Sister Betsy Sullivan, our president, and team members, Sisters Eileen Sullivan, Denise Granger, and I, continuing the legacy of the women you've met today. I feel certain that our current members honor our congregation's long history and commitments to one another and beyond. I would like you in the audience to know that as we are aging and our roles changing, we are still involved in supporting our dear neighbor, and we do mean you, however we can. We remain open to the will of God for us now and in the future. In that, we find uncommon peace.
I would like to introduce the current leadership team. Sister Elizabeth Sullivan, President. Are you here? Sister Patricia McDonald, the real Sister Patty, Vice President. Sister Elizabeth Sullivan and Denise Granger. And I invite all the Sisters of St. Joseph here to stand or otherwise make their presence known. And the associates and graduates and partners in mission. Oh.
We have shared our history with you, just some small part of it. But you have seen how we began and how we have come to this time and place. Here, now, among us, you see our present. And in this today, a glimpse of tomorrow. We are the community of St. Joseph. And if any of you have had your life touched by any or all of us, know that we have been touched by you as well. You are the dear neighbor, and we love you.
Lastly, I'd love to call up on the dear neighbors that made tonight possible. Melina Woodsbury, who was our sister Jennifer Berdier. Dr. Jasmine Hall played Mother Saint Jean Forbon. Isamar Perez was our Mother Mary Cecilia Bowen. Olivier LeBlanc played Sister Patty McDonald. And our director, Elizabeth Gord. I'd like to say thanks to Pam Robbins, whose gratitude to Sisters of St. Joseph inspired this performance and whose accompaniment and assistance made it what it is today. It's a pleasure meeting you. Steve Walsh assisted us with all of our technical needs. Techies don't usually get to take a bow, but the sister insisted that everybody get their moment in the light. Tiffany Ashline helped us collect all necessary props and served as our understudy. Nicole and Eileen of the campus ministry team, thank you for being our organizers. And I am Austin Porter. I had the pleasure of being the narrator. And finally, the woman of the hour, our dearest neighbor, Sister Jane Morrissey, played Sister Mary Dooley. And she dreamed up the play, of course. We as a team would like to dedicate this evening's production to the memory of Sister Jane's biological sister, Joyce, who passed away just a couple of weeks ago, and as expression of our sympathy in her loss. This is from the cast and crew.
Thank you so much.
We thank you for joining us tonight in our celebration of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and we wish you a blessed evening, dear neighbor.